In this video, you're going to learn how to find the slope when given 2 points. So you've learned about slope in class, and you've learned we use the letter M to talk about slope, and you've also learned that slope is rise over run, or delta y over delta x, as you see here. Our goal here is to be able to find the slope without graphing. So when we have a line in a graph, so remember, when we have a line in a graph, we always have to find those 2 points and figure out the rise and the run. So the question is, do we have to find those 2 points on the graph, or can we do it without the graph? And here's the formula that mathematicians came up with to make our lives a little bit easier so we don't have to graph every single time. So we're going to go through 3 examples in this video, and then you'll try some on your own. So the first example that we're working with here. First, we need to take a look at this formula that I've talked about. So the slope is rise over run, or delta y over delta x. The formula for that is to subtract the y's and subtract the x's. So this y2 and this y1, that simply means there are 2 sets of information. We have one point that we're going to call x1 and y1, because remember, every point has an x and a y value. And the other point is x2 and y2, because it's the second point that we're given. So we always have to figure out who's going to be the first point and who's going to be the second point. And that way our job will always work out perfectly with this formula. So the first thing you want to write on your paper is we're going to call this x1 and y1. Negative 3, 4 is going to be x2 and y2. So these are the numbers we're going to use in our formula. So it looks like this is going to be our second point and this is our first point. It doesn't matter which one's which, and you'll see that in the example here. So I'm going to take the formula and I'm going to plug in the values. So y2 minus y1 on the top, x2 minus x1 on the bottom, because that's the formula. So I'm going to take a look at the top. I'm going to find my y's and I'm going to subtract them on the top. 4 minus 2. Over the bottom, we're going to do x2 minus x1. So x2 is this value, and x1 is this value. So I'm going to subtract negative 3 minus 3. So be really careful with your negatives, don't lose them, and definitely use a calculator to check your work if you are worried about your subtraction skills. So on the top, 4 minus 2, that's pretty easy too. On the bottom, negative 3 minus 3 would put me in the whole 6. So this is your slope. You can be done at this point, but in math we like to simplify and write it as simple as possible. So the first thing that we're going to do is just put the negative out in front, because a positive divided by a negative will definitely be a negative answer. Then we're going to simplify the fraction. 2/6. When we simplify fractions, remember the step is simply to divide top and bottom by the same thing. We're trying to make these numbers smaller and simplify it. And so I see that the number 2 can go into top and bottom. So I'm going to divide by 2 because it will simplify my answer. I don't want to divide by something that would give me a decimal. So I'm going to simplify by dividing by something that they are both divisible by. My official slope, simplified form, is negative 1/3. That's your slope for the first example. So let's take a look at the next example. Okay, so once again, we're going to use this slope formula. We have to figure out who's y2, who's y1, and so on. So let's make this point y2 and x2, and this one x1 and y1. It doesn't matter as long as the first point that you choose is x1, y1, and the second point is x2, y2. So we're going to use our formula that says to subtract the y's and subtract the x's. And of course, x goes on bottom, y goes on top. So on top, we're going to have y2 minus y1. So 5 minus negative 7. Don't lose your negatives. And on the bottom, we're going to have x2 minus x1. So it's going to be 4 minus negative 2. Okay, so remember, you don't want to lose your negatives, and you want to make sure you're subtracting, because that's what the formula says. We're trying to find the difference, how much something grew. So it looks like on top, we're going to get 5 minus negative 7. Well, remember your trick from middle school, keep, change, change. You're going to get 12 on top because 5 minus negative 7 is the same as 5 plus 7, which is 12. On bottom, once again, keep the 4, change, subtraction, change the negative. And we get 6 on bottom. 4 plus 2 is 6. Well, that simplifies nicely because 12 divided by 6 is just 2. So my slope for example number 2 is 2. So you want to make sure that you pick who's going to be the first point and who's going to be the second point, and then subtract them from there. Okay, let's take a look at the next example. Example number 3, so 10, 0, and negative 5, negative 6. So we're going to subtract the two y's. So I'm not even going to write the formula down. I'm just going to say, okay, this is going to be my first one, negative 6, and I'm going to subtract the next one, 0. Okay, I have to keep with that order. Since 6 went first, now 5 has to go first. So negative 5 on bottom, minus 10 on, because that's the second x value. So let's simplify this and see what we get. Negative 6 over negative 15. So let's see how to simplify this. First of all, a negative divided by a negative I know is a positive, so I'm going to change this to a positive answer. So I don't need a negative sign here. But I need to simplify this fraction. So remember, we divide top and bottom by something that both of them are divisible by. It looks like the number 3 goes into top and bottom, so I'm going to divide by 3, and I'm going to get 2 over 5. Remember, I canceled these two negatives because a negative divided by a negative is a positive, and now I have my solution, 2/5. Okay, there's your solution. 2/5 is your slope for example number 3. So remember, simply write down this formula and remember to subtract the y's and subtract the x's. But what's really important is that the point that you pick to go first in your formula has to go first on top and bottom. This will allow you to get the right negative or positive in front of your fraction. If we don't do it that way, we will get the wrong answer. And I'll show you that here if you want to see that in action. So if, for instance, this is wrong, by the way, so don't think that this is correct, this is wrong. If I accidentally did negative 6 minus 0 on top, but I flip-flopped it on bottom and I did 10 first, then negative 5, let's see what I get. I'm going to get negative 6 on top still, but on bottom, I'm going to keep change, just like I've been doing. 10 plus positive 5, I'm going to get 15. This is going to simplify still by dividing top and bottom by 3. So that step's the same. But I'm going to get a negative answer because a negative divided by a positive is a negative. I'm going to get negative 2/5. That is a very different slope than the one up above, the positive 2/5. Remember, positive 2/5 means I'm going upwards if I were to graph this line. Negative means I'm going down. We want to make sure we get the right slope so we can describe the situation correctly. And you're going to see that when you start to apply this stuff in things like the big race. So definitely ask your teacher some questions if you have any, but move on to the practice problems that follow these examples on your worksheet.